The galaxy, in all its infinite wisdom and technological superiority, had solved the problem of cold exactly once, approximately 4,000 years ago, and had never bothered to think about it again. Why would they? When you possess gravitic heating matrices, personal shield harmonics that maintain perfect thermal equilibrium, and enough portable fusion cores to power a small moon, the concept of being cold becomes about as relevant as being attacked by a particularly aggressive rock. It simply doesn't happen. The mathematics of thermodynamics had been bent, folded, and essentially told to sit quietly in the corner, while more important physics got on with the business of faster-than-light travel and matter reconstruction. Every species that had clawed, oozed, or photosynthesized its way to spacefaring status had arrived at roughly the same conclusion. Cold was a problem for primitives. Advanced civilizations didn't huddle for warmth. They didn't layer clothing. They certainly didn't engage in the messy, inefficient business of generating heat through chemical combustion. They simply turned on their heating units and went about their day, secure in the knowledge that the universe's tendency toward entropy had been firmly put in its place. This universal truth was so deeply embedded in galactic consciousness that most species had actually forgotten what genuine bone-deep cold felt like. The Thren, with their chitinous exoskeletons and compound eyes, vaguely recalled ancestral memories of frigid cave systems, but couldn't imagine actually experiencing such conditions without climate control. The Qorathi, beings of living crystal who communicated through harmonic resonance, had evolved on a tidally locked world where temperature variation was managed by simply moving to a different hemisphere. The Vexlaw breathed methane and considered anything above -120 degrees Celsius to be uncomfortably tropical, but even they relied on suit regulation rather than biological adaptation. It was into this context of supreme technological confidence that Operation Frozen Diplomacy was conceived, planned, and very nearly became Operation Frozen Catastrophe. The mission brief had seemed straightforward enough, which should have been the first warning sign. Ritter 7, an ice planet in the Outer Reach territories, had recently been identified as the crash site of the ancient diplomatic vessel Concordance. The ship had gone missing 3 centuries prior, carrying treaty documents that several governments were suddenly very interested in retrieving, mostly because the treaties in question had some rather specific clauses about territorial rights that were now extremely valuable due to newly discovered hyperlane routes. The planet itself was a nightmare of frozen nitrogen seas and methane ice formations, with surface temperatures hovering around -180 degrees Celsius on a warm day. Its sun was a temperamental red dwarf prone to violent solar flares that played havoc with electronic systems. In short, it was exactly the sort of place that required a multi-species team with redundant technology and robust safety protocols. The team assembled for this venture represented 4 different branches of the Galactic Exploration Corps, each member selected for their specific expertise and ability to function in extreme environments. Threnix, the Thren navigation specialist, had 17 years of experience in hostile territory mapping and could calculate orbital mechanics in his head faster than most ship computers. Cora 7, the Qorathi engineer, possessed an intuitive understanding of energy systems that bordered on precognitive. Vexlin, the Vexlaw pilot, had successfully landed craft on 43 different worlds with atmospheres ranging from corrosive to combustible. And then there was the human. Lieutenant Marcus Webb had been assigned to the mission as a liaison officer, which was diplomatic speak for we need a human on the team for political reasons, but we're not entirely sure what they'll actually do. His file listed competencies in environmental adaptation, resource management, and creative problem-solving, which the other team members had interpreted as meaning he was good at filling out reports and wouldn't complain too much about the accommodations. They had, perhaps, misunderstood the assignment. The landing on HFY-7 went smoothly enough. Vexlin brought the shuttle down in a shallow valley that provided some shelter from the howling nitrogen winds, and the team's instruments quickly located the Concordance's remains approximately 3 kilometers to the northwest. The plan was simple: trek to the wreck, retrieve the diplomatic archives from the shielded vault, return to the shuttle, and be off-world before the next solar flare cycle hit. They had approximately 6 hours. They lasted 27 minutes. The solar flare that struck was not the predicted one, which wasn't due for another 5 hours. It was a surprise bonus flare, the stellar equivalent of the universe deciding that the mission was going too smoothly and required additional complications. The electromagnetic pulse washed over the valley like an invisible tsunami, and every piece of advanced technology simultaneously decided to take an unscheduled vacation. Threnix's climate suit temperature regulation flickered, steadied, then began a slow but inexorable decline. His chitinous body, which had evolved to handle cold but not this cold, immediately began the uncomfortable process of metabolic shutdown. His mandibles clicked in distress as frost began forming on his exterior plating. Cora 7's crystalline matrix, which maintained stability through carefully regulated thermal vibrations, started showing stress fractures as the heating elements in their protective harness failed. Crystals, it turns out, become extremely brittle at -180 degrees Celsius, and the Corath's harmonic distress signals took on an increasingly panicked frequency. Vexlin, ironically, was the most comfortable with the ambient temperature, but even methane breathers need suit integrity, and the seals on the Vexlor's environmental gear were designed for controlled climates, not the thermal shock of rapid system failure. Warning lights cascaded across the pilot's heads-up display like a particularly aggressive holiday decoration. All 3 aliens immediately did what any properly trained galactic explorer would do in such a situation. They began frantically attempting to restore technological function through increasingly desperate technical solutions. Power was rerouted. Backup systems were activated. Emergency protocols were engaged. Distress beacons were launched. Marcus Webb looked at the dead technology, looked at the surrounding landscape of ice and frozen atmosphere, looked at his increasingly hypothermic teammates, and calmly began unpacking the equipment nobody had paid much attention to during the mission brief. "What are you doing?" Threnix managed to chatter out, his translator struggling as his body temperature dropped. "We need to restore heating systems. All available hands should be working on technical solutions." Marcus pulled out a collapsible shovel, a sealed container of what appeared to be dried plant matter, several chemical ignition sticks, and a curious metal framework that folded out into a tripod arrangement. "I'm implementing Plan B." "There is no Plan B." Cora 7 hummed, their crystalline structure literally chiming with cold-induced stress. "The protocol is clear. We maintain shelter, restore systems, wait for rescue." "Right. That's Plan A. This is Plan B." Marcus began walking away from the shuttle, scanning the landscape. Vexlin's translator crackled. "Where are you going?" "We must remain with the ship. It provides shelter," and the pilot's words cut off as another system alarm blared. "I'll be right back." Marcus called over his shoulder. "Try not to freeze to death in the next 10 minutes. The 3 aliens looked at each other in profound confusion and mounting panic. Their suit batteries were draining at catastrophic rates, trying to maintain even minimal heating. Rescue was hours away at minimum. The human had just walked out into deadly cold carrying camping equipment. Perhaps humans were simply prone to terminal confusion when faced with extreme stress. Their psychological files did mention something about irrational optimism as a species trait. Marcus returned 7 minutes later, dragging a sizable chunk of water ice and carrying what appeared to be several fragments of Havata-7's peculiar silicate carbon rock formations. He dropped these materials in a clear area, roughly 10 meters from the shuttle, and began arranging them with what seemed like deliberate purpose. "Lieutenant Webb," Threnix said, his mandibles now barely moving as his metabolism slowed further, "this is not the time for geological sampling. Not sampling, building." Marcus arranged the rocks in a circular pattern, then used his shovel to create a small depression in the icy ground. He began breaking up some of the rocks with practiced efficiency. Cora 7 harmonics were becoming erratic. "Building what? We need technological solutions, not primitive construction." "Firepit," Marcus said simply, as if this explained everything. It did not explain anything. The human continued his work with methodical precision. He arranged the broken rocks to create a wind barrier on one side and a reflective surface using carefully positioned ice chunks on the other. From his pack he retrieved the dried plant matter, which turned out to be compressed wood fibers and some kind of accelerant-treated material. He built a small structure of increasing sizes, arranged with obvious purpose. "What is that?" Vexlin wheezed, the methane breather's suit now showing critical failure warnings across multiple systems. "Kindling, tinder, fuel." Marcus struck one of the chemical ignition sticks. A small flame appeared. All three aliens recoiled, as if he'd just summoned a demon, which, from their perspective, he essentially had. "Uncontrolled combustion reaction." Threnix's suit AI announced in alarm. "Warning. Open flame detected. This violates 17 safety protocols." "Yeah, it does that," Marcus agreed, carefully nurturing the tiny flame with additional tinder. The fire caught, grew, and within minutes had transformed from a curiosity to a genuine source of heat and light. The aliens stared at the dancing flames with a mixture of horror, fascination, and deeply ingrained cultural confusion. Fire was something that happened accidentally. Fire was what primitive species used before they discovered real technology. Fire was dangerous, unpredictable, inefficient. Fire was also, at this particular moment, the only source of heat on the planet. That's just oxidation," Cora 7 hummed weakly. "Rapid exothermic oxidation of organic compounds. That's not a solution, that's chemistry having a breakdown." "Yep," Marcus agreed, feeding larger pieces of his carefully hoarded fuel into the growing flames. "Chemistry having a breakdown that produces heat and light as byproducts. Funny how that works." Threnix's suit temperature had dropped to critical levels. His exoskeleton was covered in frost. His compound eyes were barely focusing. But we're beyond such primitive methods. We're spacefaring species. We don't burn things for warmth." "You don't," Marcus corrected, arranging more ice chunks to create a better heat reflector. "Humans never quite gave it up. Call us sentimental." The fire was properly established now, producing significant radiant heat in a roughly 3-meter radius. Marcus had positioned his wind barriers and ice reflectors to maximize efficiency, creating a surprisingly effective heating zone in the middle of a frozen wasteland. One by one, the alien suit systems failed completely. Threnix went first, his climate control giving up with a sad electronic whimper. The Thren collapsed to his 6 legs, preparing for what he assumed would be a slow, cold death. Then the warmth from the fire reached him, radiant heat washing over his chitinous body, in a way no technology had ever quite replicated. His metabolism, which had been shutting down, suddenly reversed course. His mandibles clicked in surprise. Cora 7's harness failed next, and the crystalline being fully expected to shatter into 1,000 frozen fragments. Instead, they felt heat, genuine thermal energy, stabilizing their molecular vibrations. The stress fractures stopped propagating. Their harmonic emissions shifted from panic to confusion to something approaching wonder. Vexlin's suit lasted longest but eventually surrendered to entropy. The Vexler, whose species had never in their recorded history sat near an open flame, discovered that even methane breathers could appreciate warmth when the alternative was becoming a frozen statue. The pilot's 4 eyes all fixed on the dancing flames with mesmerized intensity. Threnix managed, his translator finally working properly now that he wasn't freezing to death. How are you generating this much thermal energy from simple combustion? Marcus prodded the fire with a stick, adding more fuel. It's not complicated. Wood and carbon-based materials contain stored chemical energy. Combustion releases that energy as heat and light. Humans figured this out about 1 million years ago, give or take. But the efficiency, Cora 7 hummed, their crystal structure now glowing slightly from proper thermal regulation. The energy return must be minimal compared to fusion cores and gravitic matrices. Sure, but those need complex technology, rare materials and electrical power. This needs rocks, something burnable, and a decent understanding of oxygen chemistry. Marcus pulled out another container from his pack. Now, who's hungry? The aliens stared at him. Hungry? Vexlin repeated. You're asking about nutritional intake requirements during a survival emergency? I'm asking if you want lunch, because we're going to be here for a while, and I packed sandwiches. Marcus produced several sealed ration packs and, more surprisingly, a metal container and what appeared to be compressed food materials. He packed Snow into the container and positioned it near the fire. What are you doing now? Threnix asked, watching the human's actions with compound eyes that had shifted from panic to cautious curiosity. Making soup. Real soup. Not the reconstituted molecular stuff from the ship's dispenser. Marcus opened packets of dried vegetables, protein chunks, and seasoning compounds. Snow will melt. Water will heat. Ingredients will reconstitute and cook. It's called thermal food preparation. We also call it not starving while camping. Cora 7's harmonics shifted to a frequency that their translator struggled with before settling on. You're preparing nutrition through direct thermal application. That's how nutrients are processed. That's how food actually works at a molecular level. Well, yeah. Heat breaks down cellular structures, makes proteins more digestible, kills bacteria, improves flavor compounds. Cooking is just applied chemistry, which you'd think crystal people would appreciate. Marcus stirred his improvised pot with a utensil from his pack. The 3 aliens huddled closer to the fire, drawn by warmth and growing fascination. Their species had spent millennia perfecting food synthesis, nutrient paste optimization, and molecular reconstruction. The concept of applying direct thermal energy to raw biological materials until they became edible was simultaneously primitive and revolutionary. The soup began to bubble. Actual steam rose into the frozen air. The smell, an entirely novel experience for beings accustomed to neutral scent nutrient delivery systems, was extraordinary. The chemical compounds released during cooking, the Maillard reactions, the aromatic volatiles, hit olfactory sensors that had never processed anything like it. That smell, Vexlin said quietly, all 4 eyes still fixed on the pot. That's food cooking. Big difference. Marcus tested the temperature, nodded, and began ladling the soup into collapsible containers. Fair warning, This is going to taste different from anything you've had before. Actual flavor compounds, varying textures, temperature gradient. It's a whole experience. He handed out portions. The aliens, having abandoned all pretense of following proper protocols, accepted the offering with something approaching reverence. Threnix sipped cautiously. His mandibles froze mid-motion. His translator was silent for a long moment before managing, This is nutrition. This is what sustenance tastes like when it's not molecularly optimized." "That's what food tastes like when you cook it," Marcus corrected, eating his own portion. Messy, inefficient, probably not perfectly balanced nutritionally, but honestly way better than the stuff that comes out of the replicators. Cora 7 absorbed their portion through their specialized feeding matrix, and their entire crystalline structure resonated with surprised harmonics. The thermal variation creates layers of sensory input. The chemical complexity is extraordinary. Why would anyone ever optimize this away? Because you can, Marcus said simply. Molecular reconstruction is more efficient, more controlled, safer. But efficiency isn't everything. Sometimes the messy, complicated way is the better way, even if it doesn't look impressive on paper. They sat in silence for a while, 3 aliens and 1 human, huddled around a primitive fire on a frozen planet, eating soup that had been cooked over open flames, using methods that predated spaceflight by millennia. Above them, Ficta 7's troubled sun continued its stellar tantrum, rendering all their advanced technology useless. "I have a question," Vexlin said eventually, having finished the pilot's portion and looking almost disappointed that there wasn't more. "Why do humans know how to do this? Your species has fusion reactors, climate control, molecular synthesis. Why maintain knowledge of fire building and thermal cooking?" Marcus poked the fire again, watching sparks spiral up into the cold air. "We call it camping, or hiking, survival training, bushcraft. Different names for the same basic idea, deliberately putting yourself in a situation where you can't rely on technology and have to use older skills. But why?" Threnix asked, genuinely baffled. "What's the purpose? It's deliberately making life harder." "That's exactly the purpose," Marcus explained, warming his hands over the flames in a gesture the aliens were starting to unconsciously imitate. "See, humans have this weird relationship with our own advancement. We keep climbing the tech tree, building better tools, more efficient systems, more comfortable lives. But we also know that comfort makes you soft, reliance makes you vulnerable. So we practice the old ways, teach them to our kids, write them in manuals, keep them alive." "That seems paranoid," Cora 7 hummed. "It's practical," Marcus countered. "What happens when the technology fails? What do you do when the power goes out? When the ship crashes? When the climate control dies? You either know how to survive without it, or you die. Simple as that. But the statistical probability of catastrophic failure across multiple redundant systems is," Threnix began. "Happening right now," Marcus interrupted gently. "Look around, multiple redundant systems all failed. And the only reason we're not frozen corpses is because one species on the team remembered how to make fire." That silenced the discussion for a while. The aliens processed this information while processing their soup, both proving equally complex to digest. "There's something else," Marcus continued after a moment. "It's not just about survival. There's something valuable about doing things the hard way sometimes, about connecting with how your ancestors lived, about understanding that all your fancy technology is built on foundations of people who survived with nothing but stone, fire, and determination. Philosophy through primitive technology." Cora 7's harmonics carried something that might have been amusement. "That's very human." Guilty as charged, Marcus admitted. We're a weird species. We can build starships and still get excited about camping trips. We can synthesize any meal we want and still prefer grandma's hand-cooked recipes. We're walking contradictions, but those contradictions keep us adaptable. Vexlin shifted position, all four eyes now contemplating the fire with new understanding. Adaptability. That's what you're truly discussing. Not primitive versus advanced, but flexible versus rigid. Now you're getting it, Marcus said, pleased. Every species in the galaxy climbed the tech tree and then cut it down behind them. Humans climbed the tree, built a house in it, but kept a rope ladder to the ground just in case. Makes us look backward, but it also means we can operate at multiple levels of complexity. High tech, low tech, no tech, whatever the situation requires. A species trait, Thrinix mused, his mandibles clicking thoughtfully. Retained adaptive capacity across technological gradients. It should be inefficient. Should be, Marcus agreed. Turns out, efficiency isn't everything when things go sideways. Redundancy looks wasteful right up until it saves your life. The fire crackled and popped, a sound that predated language, older than civilization, the original gathering point for intelligent beings trying to survive in a hostile universe. The aliens, who had never in their lives experienced anything so primitive, found themselves oddly comforted by it. Hours passed. Marcus maintained the fire with practiced ease, feeding it carefully, managing the heat, creating a stable thermal zone in the midst of frozen chaos. He taught the aliens how to select good fuel, how to arrange rocks for optimal heat reflection, how to read the flames to judge temperature. They learned hesitantly at first, then with growing interest. This is actually somewhat enjoyable, Thrinix admitted, holding his appendages out to warm them. Inefficient, primitive, borderline irrational, but pleasant. That's the human condition in a nutshell. Marcus laughed. We do lots of things that don't make logical sense, but make experiential sense. Art, music, sports, camping trips, where we pretend technology doesn't exist for a weekend. It's not about logic. It's about being alive in ways that matter. When the rescue ships finally arrived, their sensors detected the team's vital signs clustered around an unexpected thermal signature. The rescue captain, a Valorian with extensive emergency response experience, descended to find 3 aliens and 1 human sitting around an open fire, warm and healthy, with the human in the process of serving what appeared to be a second round of thermally prepared nutrition. Report, the captain demanded, scanner arrays searching for the technological failure point that had necessitated the rescue. Solar flare took out our systems, Marcus explained calmly. Climate control failed. Established alternative heating solution and waited for extraction. Also retrieved the diplomatic archives from the Concordance. They're in the shuttle. The captain's scanning equipment focused on the fire pit with increasing confusion. Alternative heating solution. You mean you burned organic compounds for thermal energy? It's called a campfire, Captain. Humans have been making them for about 1 million years. They work pretty well. The 3 aliens, still huddled near the flames, nodded in agreement. Thrinix had actually developed what could only be described as an emotional attachment to the fire. Cora 7 was harmonizing at a frequency that suggested deep contentment. Vexlin was on the pilot's 4th cup of soup and showing no signs of stopping. But that's, the captain struggled for words. That's primitive technology. That's chemical combustion. That's effective, Cora 7 interjected, their crystal structure still glowing with warmth. Perhaps embarrassingly so. The rescue operation proceeded with unusual awkwardness. The team was extracted. the diplomatic archives secured, and the mission technically counted as a success. But word spread quickly through the Galactic Exploration Corps about the Difeter 7 incident, as it came to be known. 3 trained specialists, equipped with the finest technology the galaxy could provide, had been saved from certain death by fire and soup. The bureaucratic response was predictable and in its own way hilarious. Within 2 standard months, every deep space exploration team in the Corps received new training requirements: primitive survival skills, chemical combustion theory and practice, thermal food preparation, emergency resource acquisition without technological assistance. They called it the Frost Protocol, which sounded much more dignified than learning to build campfires and cook soup, because humans were right about something embarrassing. Training facilities across the galaxy installed what they officially termed emergency thermal generation stations and unofficially called learning to play with fire like primitive cave dwellers. Instructors, primarily human, but with a few converts from other species who'd actually experienced the effectiveness of such methods, taught engineers and scientists how to make fire with sticks, rocks, and determination. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations, capable of manipulating space-time and engineering artificial gravity, now included rubbing sticks together until something catches fire in their core competency requirements. Marcus Webb, for his part, became something of an accidental celebrity. He gave lectures on survival skills, wrote training manuals, and tried very hard not to laugh during official ceremonies where he was commended for innovative application of historical methodologies in crisis situations. "You saved 3 lives with fire and soup," his commanding officer said during one such ceremony. "That's got to feel good." "It does," Marcus admitted. "But it's also hilarious. The entire galaxy forgot how to be cold, and it took a frozen planet and some dried vegetables to remind everyone that sometimes the old ways are old because they work." The real lasting impact, though, was more subtle. Species that had spent millennia pursuing technological perfection began reconsidering the value of maintained knowledge. Not everything old was obsolete. Not everything primitive was inferior. Sometimes the simplest solution, the one your ancestors would have recognized, was the best solution. Camping became oddly popular among younger members of several species. Parks on developed worlds saw an uptick in visitors wanting to experience historical survival conditions, which meant having picnics near supervised fire pits. Cooking as an art form, rather than molecular reconstruction as a science, experienced a renaissance. And deep in the training archives of the Galactic Exploration Corps, alongside manuals on quantum navigation and faster-than-light mechanics, there now existed detailed instructions on how to build a fire, purify water, and make soup from basic ingredients. The galaxy had spent 4,000 years believing it had solved the problem of cold through technological superiority. It took one stranded human on a frozen planet to remind everyone that the problem of cold had been solved much earlier than that, by creatures who had nothing but rocks, sticks, and the stubborn determination to not freeze to death. Fire, it turned out, was not obsolete. It was foundational. And every advanced technology in the galaxy was ultimately just fancy ways of doing what fire had always done, keeping the darkness and cold at bay while people gathered together, shared food, and told stories about surviving another day. The universe, in its infinite complexity and stellar vastness, occasionally required a reminder that some solutions were timeless, not because they were perfect, but because they were honest. And nothing was more honest than sitting around a fire, warming your hands, and cooking a meal while the cold universe raged harmlessly outside your circle of light and heat. Humanity had never stopped doing this, even when they'd gained the ability to heat entire planets. They'd kept the knowledge alive because they understood something the rest of the galaxy had forgotten. You don't abandon the tools that kept your species alive just because you've invented better ones. You keep them, practice them, pass them down, and treasure them. Because someday, somewhere, someone's technology is going to fail. And on that day, the most advanced solution in the galaxy might just be a pile of burning sticks, a pot of hot soup, and the ancient human wisdom that sometimes the best way forward is to remember where you came from. The fire crackles, the soup bubbles, the cold stays outside where it belongs, and the galaxy, slowly and slightly embarrassed, learns to play with matches.